Today we will talk about Amy Tan's mother tongue. Before we do, I have a little writing activity for you to do. Look at the picture of a family at dinner. Think about how your family or friends talk at a meal. In what ways do you speak differently to friends and family than in class? Grab a sheet of paper or open a Word document. You may pause the video to do this. Now that you're back, pay attention as I click. A quote bubble will appear. Write something a friend or family member would say. Create a conversation in the natural speech you use with friends and family. Pause the video to complete this activity. Good. Now that you have completed the activity, we will discuss Amy Tan's mother tongue. A few weeks ago, we talked about the different types of essays in literature. There is personal essay, informative essay, and personal essay. A persuasive essay is when you are trying to convince me of your opinion. You back it up with research and information that you have found from an accredited source. You can also write an informative essay. You may present an idea or a change that has been done in the community. For example, a new law has been passed and you want people to know about it. There is also personal essay. For example, you may want to write about your experience of cooking with your family. Is Amy Tan's mother tongue a persuasive, informative, or personal essay? Take a moment to consider the question. Good. Amy Tan's essay is a personal essay. A personal essay includes an idea of interest important to the life of its author. Think about the dialogue you wrote on the first slide. How is it important to you? We looked at a family sitting down at dinner talking. Now, your family may not sit down at a table. You may sit in front of TV. You may do something differently. But think about how dialogue with your friends or family is important. Why would you put it in an essay? How is Tan's essay personal when compared to informative or persuasive? We will look at what I call context clues to help us answer the question. We will look at clues on page 1208 and 1209. What clues can we use before reading the text or even after reading the text? By now you have read mother tongue through once, but we are going to look at the specific types of clues that help us answer these questions. We look at context clues. What are context clues? They are anything that tells us about the text before we even read it, or when we look back after reading. We could skim the page and see keywords. Keywords could be underlined, they could be bolded, they could be italicized, or they could even be in a different color. You will also see a lot of pictures in Amy Tan's mother tongue. Pictures can tell you a lot about a story. You will also find quotes. For example, in some books like our textbook, quotes will be put into colorful blocks. Those quotes may tell us something important about our essay. As I said before, some keywords are bolded. Now, let us look at page 1208. If you open your book to page 1208, you will see a few context clues right away. There's the picture of a city, the title, and then we see a block quote. When I was growing up, my mother's limited English limited my perception of her. What does this quote tell us right away? Why is it important? How is it a clue that Tan's essay is personal? First off, we see that Amy Tan is talking about her mother. She's talking about what she thinks of her mother. She felt her mother's language was limited. Now, let's look at page 1209. There I see another kind of context clue, also a quote. It has become our language of intimacy, a different sort of English that relates to family talk, the language I grew up with. So on page 1209 and 1208, we can see these context clues without reading the text that the essay is personal. If you consider writing about your family, do you think it is personal or that the essay is trying to persuade someone? In this case, Tan is telling a personal story. Now consider the different languages or dialect you use. For example, if you're from the South, you may have a dialect that represents where you are from. It may sound different if you have lived in the Appalachian Mountains compared to if you've lived on the East Coast. You may be from another country and have a dialect. It is a different way of speaking. Think about reading, writing, conversation, emails, and texts. And I'm talking about text messages, not your textbook. Consider text messaging, whether it is spelled correctly or not. Now consider the prompt below. Describe a different language or dialect you use below your cloud quotes. Pause the video now. Good. Now that you have written about a different language or dialect you use, let us continue. Flip to page 1211. Look at the first column. Consider these questions as we read. Have you ever judged someone in a good or bad way based on the language they use? Is there only one form of English? Why or why not? Think about your cloud quotes that you wrote. Think about the context clues that we looked at in Tan's essay, such as the block quotes. Also, consider the prompt that you wrote. We are beginning reading at the top of page 1211. My mother has long realized the limitations of her English as well. When I was 15, she used to have me call people on the phone to pretend I was she. In this guise, I was forced to ask for information, or even to complain or yell at people who had been rude to her. One time it was a call to her stockbroker in New York. She had cashed out her small portfolio, and it just so happened we were going to go to New York the next week, our very first trip outside California. I had to get on the phone and say in an adolescent voice that it was not very convincing, "This is Miss Tan." And my mother was standing in the back, whispering loudly, "Why ye don't send me check? Already 2 weeks late. So mad he lied to me, losing me money." And then I said in perfect English, "Yes, I'm getting rather concerned. You had agreed to send the check 2 weeks ago, but it hasn't arrived." Then she began to talk more loudly. "What he won't. I come to New York, tell him in front of his boss. You cheating me." And I was trying to calm her down, make her be quiet, while telling the stockbroker, "I can't tolerate any more excuses. If I don't receive the check immediately, I am going to have to speak to your manager when I'm in New York next week." And sure enough, the following week, there we were in front of this astonished stockbroker, and I was sitting there red-faced and quiet, and my mother, the real Mrs. Tan, was shouting at his boss in her impeccable broken English. From what we read, how do you think people view Tan's mother? We can use context clues, such as the fact that there's a block quote. My mother has long realized the limitations of her English as well. So there we know that Even her mother considers her English limited. But explain how the stockbroker might judge Tan's mother's use of language. If it had been Miss Tan on the phone instead of Amy, what might he think? Would he listen to her? Now, as you consider the questions and consider the answers, I want you to create 2 questions about Amy Tan's mother tongue. Use questions that require sentence answers, not just yes or no. Use questions that will challenge your classmates. Also, be prepared to share your answer to your questions. For example, consider how Tan talks about the cultural misconception of limited English. Why does she say it's a misconception? If you consider the very first context clue, the quote that we looked at, she mentioned limited English. So I look forward to seeing you in class tomorrow. Have a good night.